Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on what time I got you here. I'm your host, Madison Feet, and this is the Passion Podcast, PORG for short. During this podcast episode, I will actually explore video games, a topic that brings me personal joy. So I do want you to know that if you do enjoy this episode, you might want to watch another. You can actually find the rest on wjhs915.org. Now, if you're wondering as to why you should listen to this episode, here's an answer that will hopefully suffice your curiosity. 1, as your host, it would be a good way to get to know me. 2, if you enjoy talking about video games, then this might be the podcast episode for you. 3, it could strike up a very interesting conversation between you and your peers, or maybe even with me. And 4, perhaps as a listener, you can relate to my interests, and this could ultimately create a bond between us, from presenter to viewer. So, now that you know that my episode is about video games, let me narrow it down for you. I pretty much just want to talk about what makes a video game good. Now, I am in no way an expert, I just love to game. I've been doing it for years, but I do have ideas as to what makes at least a decent video game, which I hope you are willing to listen. First thing I'm pretty sure you need is a good story and a good plot. Personally, I love cruel plot lines, dark and horrid, but in general, I think the plot should be meaningful, in depth, but also not too deep. I guess that depends on the player, but this list is based on my personal preferences. I know everyone's not going to agree with me, but these are my opinions as to what makes a video game good. Along with meaningful, I think the plot should be suspenseful to keep the players hooked. And I don't think the plot should be too simple, but I also don't think it should be overbearing or complex. I think as a player, I'd be happy if the creators could find a middle ground in between those two. As for characters, I think they should be written well, as so should the plot. Of course, I think the characters should be in depth too, relatable, charismatic, or at least entertaining to keep me and other players hooked. I also think after creating the characters from scratch, it's important to bring the characters together. I think it's important to establish solid relationships, and I think it's important to introduce the characters in a way that it sits well with the player. And I think there should be more than that one layer of objectives, such as their reasoning. Why are they doing what they're doing? What's their goal? Also their history. What in their life has led them to this point? I think it's very important to focus on their personality, which is what makes them them. And I think it's important that relationships should be explored thoroughly too. Diving deeper into characters, I wanted to talk about the antagonist. Personally, I love very gruesome and cruel antagonists. I want them to be written in depth too, and I want to hear about their backstory and their reasoning as well. And I want to understand why they are so evil, what led them to being the villain in the story. And in the games that I've played, I learned that I loved very gruesome characters. Scary, I think, is what I'm going for, because I want to be intimidated. I want it to be like the first I lay eyes on the villain, I am fearful of that character, like I am anxious to have that interaction with them that will later lead to a boss fight. I want a villain that's gonna make me cower in fear. And I want a villain who is hard to beat. I don't want some weak antagonist who's very easy to beat, because I want a challenge that's gonna be fun and to keep me invested. So, as of playing games for years, I've realized there is an important factor to affect certain circumstances and to intensify your feelings and experience, especially in battles, especially in boss fights. And that is music. Very, very intense music. Yes, graphics help too when intensifying your experience, but I think music is more important. Music can be effective when intensifying your gameplay. It can paralyze you with fear when you're about to do something daring, or maybe draw some tears when a sad scene comes in. You really just need the right music at the right time, and I think that makes the gameplay so much better. Going back to graphics, that can help too. I'm not too picky when it comes to looks, but I do enjoy the realism. But like I said, I'm not picky as long as everything in the shot is identifiable, which I guess that really matters on how much effort is put into the game, which is also important. I think the more effort that's implemented into the project, the better it will be. I think that it's truly evident whether the creators care about the game or if it's just a cash grab, depending on how much they put into the project. So that's why I think it's important to put everything you can into it. All the creativity you can, all the effort, the time, of course being wary of the budget. And I think that controls is also important, which happens to be the last thing on my list. I think the controls should be simple. I think it's important to not catch the players off guard with too many button combos, too much button smashing, things like that. Sometimes it's just good to go simple. And simplicity is not a bad thing. It can actually be good, easy, fun even. So that is my list of all the factors that I think are important and that makes the game satisfactory to me. Just the plot, the characters, the antagonists, the music and graphics, the effort put into the game, and the controls. I think those are the most important factors. And talking about it today, I've realized I'd love to have many more conversations like this in the future. But for now, I am gonna head off as I figured I've rambled enough today. Reminder that you can find the rest of these episodes on WJHS915.org if you are interested. And I have been your host today, coming on to Porg. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I wish you a good day.